Stick around for the Ansari podcast. Lisa Vogl, thank you for joining the podcast. I'm honored to have you on. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
One of the things that I'm very fascinated about your story and wanting to have you on is the sheer resilience and the exemplary drive behind it all. Can you tell me a little bit about your story and how you grew up? Where'd you even grow up in the first place?
I grew up in East Lansing, Michigan, suburban area, and being very honest and direct, very privileged in every sense. Financially, grew up in great neighborhoods, great schools. I did not have much access to the world, and cultural traveling was like to Paris. So I didn't really have a good understanding of the world until I went to college and started kind of living on my own. I was a devout Christian. I was actually kind of the oddball of the family. No one really understood me, but my family was very different, where they weren't attached to religion like I was. It was just something that I was naturally drawn to. And we can talk about it, but Islam later came into my life in my late 20s.
Okay, so it was in your late 20s where you found Islam. All
Yeah.
right. What do you think events happened in your life, whether directly or indirectly, that led you to Islam?
You know, looking back, Islam kind of popped into my life over the course of a decade. My first introduction to Islam was my move to Morocco. And I have always been this free spirit. And I decided to take a year off of college and save up all my money and travel. So I went through Europe. I backpacked for several countries, and I decided to move to Morocco for 3 months. And then I taught English at the American Language Center in Tangier, and I lived with a Moroccan family. And because I just wanted to immerse myself in the culture, not the religion necessarily, I decided to live like them as much as I could. So I wore the abaya and the hijab, and I tried to fast with them, even though I would totally sneak food in between, but I tried. And I would pray with them at Fajr time. But it was more just about the experience and appreciating the way they lived. It wasn't necessarily learning about Islam. Later on, I graduated college. I went to and got a corporate job, and it just wasn't happy. So I decided to literally quit, no thought into it. I just quit and I moved to Florida because I wanted to go to photography school. It literally was just an epiphany. I'm like, I'm going to be a photographer with no thought behind it. It wasn't anything about that I've always dreamed of being a photographer. I just wanted to do it. So I dropped what I was doing, moved to Florida, and second semester into photography school, I was given an assignment to do a documentary of our choice, and I decided to focus on why women wear the hijab, because I wore it when I was younger in Morocco, but I didn't really have an understanding behind it. So I started interviewing local Muslims, and that's really what led me to my journey of studying Islam, because as I did the interview, I was very impressed with the answers, and I didn't realize how much of a closed mindset I actually had myself, because looking back, my questions were ignorant. And it was kind of that almost American view of the hijab being oppressive, when even, in fact, I respected it myself, and I tried to honor the local culture. And I use that word loosely because we know it's religious and not culture, but in my mind, a cultural norm for them. And having been a devout Christian my whole life, I didn't even know it was in the Bible. So it was the first time I learned about hijab being in the Bible. And from there, that my mindset changed, and I started learning about Islam.
Interesting. So can you tell me a little bit about what preconceived notions did you have about the hijab?
Just hands down, it was oppressive.
Okay.
Yeah, I had that mindset, and I admit it. And I don't get upset. And maybe it's easier for me to not get so upset when people have such an ignorant view of Islam, because I was in their shoes, and I think it's not ill intent. It's just they don't have access to correct information. Now it's a little bit different because we're talking about the age of social media, where they have a lot more access to correct information. But if you think about it, the way I grew up, 90s and early 2000s, our information was from the news, and it's their narrative, not the correct narrative. So we're fed misinformation. And if you don't have the ability to really understand what Islam is about or what the hijab is about, I don't necessarily blame them. Now is a little bit different because we have a lot more access to correct information. But yeah, that long story short is, in my mind, it was still oppressive.
And this journey with photography and doing a project on the hijab kind of really changed the way you viewed the hijab?
Completely, 100%. I started recognizing it's not that women who don't wear hijab are somehow oppressed as well. It's that women are inundated on what it means to be perfect. And this is a perfect body, and this is the perfect, skin tone, and this is the perfect body shape. And we are constantly told what beauty is when none of it's real. None of it. No one can live up to these standards. And the beauty industry is oppressive, making women feel that the more they reveal themselves, somehow they're liberated. When in fact, liberation comes from whether or not you have the choice. And for me, now, being much wiser in my opinion, the hijab is what liberates me. It's that I choose what people can see of my body.
Wow. So what would you say to someone that still thinks of the hijab as oppressive now that you're on the other side of it?
I would say that the meaning of oppression is to force something to do anyone in either way. That the meaning of liberation is to have the choice, and we can say that, and very easily so, there's other countries that are Muslim, they're oppressive towards women because they force the hijab on them. That's not what Islam is. Islam is about the choice to follow it or not. It should never be forced either way.
Yeah, and vice versa is true,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
Whereas
women in France should not be told that they can't wear the burkini or they can't wear the niqab. Or, women in America should feel free without feeling like they're going to get attacked by Islamophobes just because they simply want to cover.
Yeah. So what was the breaking point? What made you then become Muslim? Did that happen years later from this project, or was it
It was
close?
around 9 months to a year. When I go into something, I go full forced, completely in. I have no gray. I'm a black and white type of a person when when I'm involved in something. And I was reading the entire Quran. I met with imams. I was watching YouTube videos on Islam. I, read books. I did everything I could to really study. And the short answer of why I chose Islam was I had already believed in one God. That's a misconception that Muslims have about Christians, that they believe in the Trinity is looked at as one God. And I know it doesn't make sense at all, but in their heart, they believe in one God. But the contradictions in Christianity and the questions that I had and doubts that I had in Christianity, Islam answered for me.
Can you name a couple, or do you not?
Sure. I mean, just off the top of my head, I'm sure I have a long list. But for instance, there's no understanding in the Bible as to what happens if a child doesn't receive the word of God. There's nothing as far as a verse. You can't show me a verse that tells me what happens, right? So in Islam, we know that children they go to heaven. That a 3-year-old is not going to be doomed to hell because they didn't, understand Islam. Whereas we know the answer that children go to heaven. We're also judged based on what we know in Islam. The Trinity itself, we can break that down. Is Jesus God, or is he the Son of God? And if Jesus is God, then why would God need to sacrifice himself to forgive you? He's powerful enough to forgive you if he created you. So just even breaking the Trinity down is reason enough to believe in Islam.
Yeah, it's actually almost an insult to the mercy of God.
Absolutely.
To say that he has
to sacrifice something in order to forgive you to enter into heaven. He created you.
Yeah.
So
he should just be able to forgive
exactly.
you. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Islam has an answer for everything, whereas the other religions don't. You can ask any question, anything, and Islam will provide an answer. It has to be both the unconditional belief that there's one God, and then the logic also follows up with it as well.
Yeah. When was that moment of hidayah? When was that moment of guidance for you? Did you feel it? Was it a memorable moment for you?
The day I decided to finally convert to Islam, it was the Friday before Ramadan in 2011. And I went to this humble masjid in Florida by myself. I went and listened to the khutbah and prayed Jama'ah.
Which was Friday prayer.
Friday prayer, yeah. I kind of sat in the masjid for a little bit after I was done. And I sat next to this woman. I was like, I don't know how the conversation started. I'm like, yeah, I'm not Muslim, but I'm thinking about converting. So I just started chatting with her, and she's like, well, I really think you should do it now because Ramadan's about to start and there's so many blessings. So I remember her telling me that, and I walked out to my car and I prayed, and I was like, God, please give me a sign if this is the right religion. And all of a sudden I got chills from my head to my toe, and this just complete and utter peace in me. So I was like, yeah, this is the right religion. So I went up and talked to the first sister that I saw, and I said, I want to take my shahada. And then she went and immediately grabbed a brother. And then suddenly the whole masjid is like focused around me. And I'm like not expecting that. Like that was the first introduction to the Muslim community. like where all of a sudden everyone wants to video record your shahada. And I'm like, what just happened? And like everyone created this circle around me. And I just sat there with the brother and his microphone. And I remember closing my eyes, and when he gave me the shahada, when I repeated the shahada with him, I just remember it was like Allah took everybody out of the room. And it was just, I could hear the brother's voice, but it was like he wasn't there. And it was just me and Allah. And it's a feeling I can't put into words, and it's very difficult to express, but I'll never forget it. And I just remember tears just rolling down my face, just completely feeling like it was just me and Allah. And I said my shahada, I woke up. It was like as if like I ventured into a new world. I can't even explain it. And then everyone started hugging me and kissing me and, welcome to Islam. So yeah, that was the moment that I finally decided to become Muslim.
Well, what was the biggest difference between yourself when you converted versus before that?
Oh, night and day of who I am. One is that I thought that suddenly my life would become easier. I'm Muslim. I'm on the right path. Alhamdulillah. That's when the majority of my struggles in my life occurred. Some of the worst moments in my life. And although they were horrible, I did get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the process. A lot of ups and downs. But I also think that if it weren't for the trials that I went through, that I wouldn't be who I am today. And I look at them and I'm saying, I'm thankful for these trials. It's a place of privilege to be able to try to go in and help other people. So I believe what I went through, what I did was to help other people. I really believe that. And I pray and hope it's helping.
Yeah, I actually told my friend when he converted to Islam, now the test begins.
Yeah.
Before you were kind of sitting back, chilling, now because, one of the opening passages of the passage of the spider in the Quran is, do people think they will claim that they believe and we won't test them on that? Verily, we've tested those before them, and the verse goes on.
It's so true. At the end of the day, this life is a test. It's not supposed to be easy. Like, obviously, Allah provides ease, but we are supposed to have a higher standard as Muslims.
And they say that when Allah loves a person, when Allah loves one of his servants, he tests them.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of questions or fears arose as you were looking into Islam or thinking about becoming Muslim? I mean, you were probably thinking, like many other people do, my family, my friends, what will I say to them? What am I going to start wearing, dressing differently, the hijab? Like, it feels like your whole world is crashing in on you. How did you deal with those questions and those fears?
Okay, so one, I think there's a misconception that reverts had this and I'm not saying you assumed this, I just mean in general, had this like crazy past and this like party lifestyle that they all of a sudden had to change. I didn't eat pork as before. I've had it when I was younger, but I already didn't eat it. I didn't drink. I didn't go to clubs. I didn't so there wasn't much of a lifestyle change that had to really change. The hijab and then actively praying were the biggest changes, and that came over time. In fact, I started wearing the hijab before I took my shahada because I knew I wanted to convert, and so I started practicing like I was Muslim. I did it in phases, and I always recommend new reverts that, listen, like Islam is a journey, and you have to be, if you walk towards Allah, Allah will run to you. So alhamdulillah, like I think I started doing all 5 prayers within like a year or two. The fasting was the hardest for me, and it still is the hardest. I do it. I hate it. Like, I'm not going to try to act like I love it. I hate it. Like, absolutely hate it, but I do it. And so, inshallah, hopefully I'm rewarded more for it. But
how about your family? How'd you deal with that?
My family did take it rough. It was, my dad, who's no longer here, he took it the easiest, and he said, if you're happy, I'm happy. It's almost like he didn't really care. The hijab was what was difficult for my family because all of a sudden they now had to explain my lifestyle to everybody else that had questions. And I understand that that's not fair to them. But at the end of the day, like, I have to answer to Allah. Even if it's my mom, I don't care about their opinions when it comes to answering to Allah and doing the right thing. I can be compassionate and merciful throughout the process. But at the end of the day, I'm going to do what's right.
Do you recall what was going on through your mind as you were preparing to tell your family?
I think that that was probably the most difficult part of the entire conversion process was suddenly having to explain your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to everybody. And although that's something we should be loud and proud about, it was a little difficult at first. And actually it wasn't my family that was as hard for me as it was walking into school, to my photography school with the hijab all of a sudden.
Hmm.
And everyone's like confused as to what happened. And then having to explain why all of a sudden I'm wearing the hijab. And now I could care less. You know what I mean? I've gained my confidence where I really don't care what people think of me. This is me, take it or leave it. But I didn't have that confidence then.
So how'd you deal with that? Or what kind of thoughts went through your head or fears?
I think I cried the first day because my friend all of a sudden he thought it was like a joke. Like one of my photography partners, he started like laughing when I wore the hijab. And I think I remember just being very upset about it. But my belief is stronger than, it was always stronger than having to please them. So it didn't deter me from taking off the hijab. I still, move forward, but it wasn't easy. It was kind of a take it or leave it. This is me, and you either accept me or you don't.
Huh. So where'd you gain that confidence from? Or did it come from the background of knowledge that you first developed in yourself, or was it straight up faith?
I would say more conviction than confidence. I don't think I necessarily had confidence, but I had conviction in my faith, where my belief overtook, to do the right thing. But I would argue that I didn't really have the confidence at that point. Confidence came later through all the struggles that I went through in life. When I hit rock bottom, in my opinion, rock bottom in my life, you start to let go of everything else, everybody's opinions. You just don't care anymore because you put into perspective as to what's important.
Yeah, I heard a wise man once said that at the age of 20, you care about what everyone says.
Mm-hmm.
At the age of 40, you don't care about what everyone says. And then at the age of 60, you realize that no one was saying anything at all in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah, very true. Just the honest to God truth, the raw truth is when I believe something, I believe it. And even though I didn't have confidence then, I don't let people like sway me into doing what I want to do. So I think I'm a little bit stubborn. And my mom always said growing up, like, you're stubborn, but you're stubborn in a good way because you're going to do the right thing. So I think it's just my personality, honestly.
Okay. Alhamdulillah. All right, I get that. What's one misconception about Islam that you would like your fellow Americans to know about?
Oh, no. You're hitting me with some tough questions. I would say being someone that works heavily with women's rights and women empowerment, that women are considered less than in Islam. And in fact, they're so highly revealed, and it's a religion that increased our rights and made sure that we were protected.
On the next episode of the Ansari podcast,
he pulled my shirt into another room, slammed the door, locked it, and then knocked me out. That was the first time he physically abused me.
I'm your host, Mahmoud Elansary, and this is the Ansari podcast.